Africa is entering a period of exciting opportunities, with potential for transformative economic growth, social development, and regional integration. The continent's vision for the future emphasizes inclusive progress, innovation, and sustainable prosperity. Africa is endowed with mineral wealth and holds 30% of the world's proven reserves of critical minerals essential for the shift towards clean energy, including cobalt, lithium, and nickel that are vital for battery technologies. Africa is the continent with the majority of the youth population, with 60% of the population 15 to 24 residing in the continent, which brings opportunities. Africa is geographically strategically located at the center of world economic trade. Its proximity to Europe, the Middle East, and Asia positions it as a logistics and manufacturing hub for global supply chains. The western portion of the continent is also proximate to North America. This session explores what it will take to achieve the Africa that its people aspire to. It will examine how partnerships between governments, regional organizations, international institutions, and private sector actors can foster inclusive growth, drive innovation, and expand opportunities, not only in terms of economic output, but also in creating long-term, sustainable, and equitable outcomes for all communities.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mohamed Kassem. I'm the moderator of the last panel today, and I'm entrusted with the task to keep you awake after a very long day. And for that will help me a great panelist, a list of panelists that's really too valuable that two of them, they have sit on previous panels before. So let me introduce quickly the panelists, and then we go about our discussion today. Binitie, to my immediate right, and Ehizogie is co-founder and former CTO of Rancard Solution. He is now CEO of Resrv Technologies and the Clear Space Labs. These are very difficult things for me to understand, but he will explain. We on Zoom, joining us virtually, Ndidi Nwuneli. Ndidi, President and CEO of One Campaign. She has over 25 years of experience in international development, focused on social innovation in Africa. And this will be very much needed today. Our third panelist is Ayu Sopitan. Ayu is a CEO and founder of Metalex Commodities, and this is something that we will need to improve the situation in Africa. He holds a degree from Bryant University in New York, and he has very experienced in the business. The next panelist is Mamadou Biteye, Executive Secretary, the African Capacity Building Foundation, and he's a Managing Director, Africa for Rockefeller Foundation, and Oxfam Regional Director for West Africa. The following panelist is Nathalie Delapalme. Nathalie is the Chief Executive Officer of Ibrahim Foundation. This foundation is an icon for Africa. She was an Inspector General de Finance at the French Ministry of Economy and Finance. Last but not least, Nangula Uaandja, Chief Executive Officer, Namibia Investment Promotion and Development Board. She's a chartered accountant by profession, and she will enlighten us today about Africa and what can we do with it. You have heard or watched the introductory video, and that introductory video showed us how important Africa is and where does it stand. It is a home of 1.5 billion people. The total GDP for this 1.5 billion is only 2.8 trillion. But the average growth is 3.5% per year, and the FDI inflows in the yearly average is 97%. It's endowed by young population, as you have seen in the video. However, out of 100 armed conflict in the world, 35 are in Africa. Climate change in terms of flooding and the droughts are hitting Africa a lot more than any other continent. So Africa trade, internal trade, is very minimal despite the continental FTA that should have opened the borders and doors to trade intra-African countries. However, it's not happening until now. So between all these positives and negatives, there is something happened in the world we all noticed. There is a shift in the dynamics of growth and development. For the past 30, 40 years, we have seen offshoring model, manufacturing and the investment is going from Europe, the United States to Asia. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine proved that the global supply chain is not resilient enough. It's long and it can be disruptive very easily. So the mindset now all over the world, despite what we see in the geopolitics and the tension between the United States and China, or between the West and the rest, there is a shift from offshoring to nearshoring. And that shift provides Africa with a great opportunity to attract demand on exports and attract also FDIs. So our panel today will address two questions. Each one will answer these questions in 5 minutes. And then after the second round of questions, we'll open the floor for discussion, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll start with the first question, is how can we benefit in Africa from the new dynamics that's taking place right now? We start from my right. But we'll save Nathalie for last.
Thank you. It's great to be on another panel and to contribute to this conversation. I think there are multiple, how can we benefit from the new dynamics? So the question is, what are the new dynamics? The new dynamics in terms of shifts in technology, new dynamics in terms of going from essentially a unipolar world to a multipolar world, new dynamics from the context of changes in supply chains and market fragmentation, new dynamics from the perspective of a reduction in aid, new dynamics from the perspective of strengthening of local currencies, and new dynamics from the perspective of a fast-growing population. So I think there are many angles to think of the new dynamics from. I think the most interesting of them is that we have a young population in one of the fastest growing segments of the world, which is positioned to deliver significant value to the world. So I would start by saying that how we benefit from this is by galvanizing our countries and our capital to bet on ourselves. And that, for me, would be the start point from how we benefit from these new dynamics.
Thank you, Ehizogie. Please.
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me. So my name is Sopitan. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Metalex. So we are a mining company, mining copper and cobalt in Zambia. We're the largest independent, and that's relevant for what I'm about to say. But so how do we benefit? So essentially, you know, Africa has been a desirable partner, and I'm using the word partner kind of loosely here, for the rest of the world as a source of raw material, right? So, in fact, if I may try to paint a picture, I often think about, you know, the world having a feast, right? Everyone in the world has a seat at that table. Africa is on the menu, and everyone's eating except for Africans. So that's how it's been. So how do we benefit? I think we have to participate. We have to jump in, right? We have the youngest population, like everyone likes to talk about. We talk about potential at every conference like this one. And in fact, my father, who's since passed away, was a central banker in Nigeria. And, you know, I remember when I was a kid, him talking about stuff like this in conferences like this one, right? So the question is, you know, after we get together and we have good conversations, what do we do? So my view is we have to jump in and participate. So the title of the panel is interesting, right? So how do we get the Africa that we want? And I said to myself, what's that Africa? What does that look like? So in my view, it's an Africa where if you want an education, if you want good health care, if you want social mobility, you should be able to get it without sacrificing well-being, right? So not just, you know, being a contributor to GDP, but contributing in a way that doesn't destroy the environment, right? So that's part of what we're trying to do at my company. And how do we do that? Well, so in summary, my view is we monetize our wealth that's beneath the ground, so that's the mines. On the ground, that's the farms. And above ground, that's the people and the forests. I feel like we ignore one of our sources of wealth in Africa, which is our forest. You know, so we have this green belt from Senegal to Ethiopia, you know, from the northern Namibia to Mozambique. That's incredibly valuable. We're 13% of the world's population, but we're contributing 3% of the emissions. The world needs to pay us for that, right? So how do we participate? It's basically just monetizing our resources and also mobilizing capital from, you know, the remittance universe. The FDI is increasing, but, you know, we need to be careful when we celebrate that, because, you know, where does the ownership go, right? And then and basically just challenging the nonprofit world to potentially work differently. Finally, I'll say this. I think we have to come to terms with the fact that nobody is coming to save Africa, right? So we're gonna have to do it ourselves. The cavalry isn't coming, and that's a liberating thought. Once you admit it, look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, no one's coming to save us until we decide to save ourselves. And we do that by you know, monetizing our people, natural resources, and other resources that we have. Thanks.
Thank you, Ayo. Mamadou.
Okay. Thank you. Perhaps I should start by saying that the Africa that we want is not a distant dream. It is something that can be actually achieved. It is very well defined in the Agenda 2063. It's really about inclusive growth. It's about good governance. It's about peace. It's about shared prosperity. So, to me, the Africa that we want is not something that that needs more defining. It is more about how do we deliver it. And to deliver that, one of the areas I feel like we are not doing enough is really to build our capacities. And when I talk about capacities, I want to talk about human capacity in terms of skills, competencies, and other soft skills that are extremely important, particularly around the sense of service, the inclusiveness, the transparency and accountability is really important. Because also, because of the gaps in those areas, we are seeing also the continent losing extremely important resources to illicit financial flows, which is a lost opportunity. But it's also about strengthening institutions, institutions that are functional, that are actually effective in carrying over their mandate. And lastly, connecting, producing, disseminating knowledge, connecting people to that knowledge and connecting people more to people. I think those are really important. Now, to your point about offshoring or onshoring, it is an opportunity, right, by which operations are relocated in quest of maybe cheaper labor, maybe other resources that enable that. But to me, it's an opportunity, but not in an even way everywhere in Africa. Because some places have electricity, which is extremely important for manufacturing. Others have maybe no electricity or extremely expensive electricity to the point that it's not competitive. In Africa, we have a wealth of well-educated people, but a shortage of skilled workers, the medium, particularly in manufacturing. This is also something that I think needs to be also prioritized. But I think that one of the really important, also, Africa is a rich continent, right? But most of these resources are actually just exported as commodities. No value added. So that capacity building is about really looking at how do we harness these resources? How do we add value to them, right? And building an indigenous industry, actually, that also can serve and commerce with the world. But to me, when you go between a dream and results, the missing link is capacity. And that's where we are not investing enough. I work in this area, but one of the things I have noticed is that for most of the capacity building needs, I think that most countries, many recognize the need for capacity building, but this is something to be funded by others. And I believe that it's important that this be prioritized and countries investing in it, because that's really what will enable to transform the dream into measurable results and transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadou. Nangula?
Hello, thank you. The good thing of speaking after so many people have spoken, all you need to do is say, I agree with them. They are very, very right. So I think it's probably really summarizing what has been said. I believe this is the best time for Africa, at least in my lifetime. There has been a lot that has happened. We have got leaders that have realized the Africa that we want, yes, that may have been 2013, 2063 is still a bit of a distance away, so we have got a lot of time to do what we need to do. And why this is a good time for Africa is there has been a lot of global shifts, like you have said, like it said on the video, and they say in every challenge is an opportunity. And I think most of the global shifts are actually providing an opportunity for Africa, because the world is looking for new resources, they are looking for new solutions, and I think they are looking to Africa for some of that. The challenge that we have is, are we ready to make sure that we are able to support the world in responding to the challenges that the world is facing? So the world needs Africa, and I think it has been said, from minerals to energy to labor to arable land, the list is long. To untapped culture, the list is long of what Africa can do to support the world. But of course, Africa needs the world, because as it has been said, there are missing links. We do not necessarily have the skills that is required. We might not have all the capitals that is required. So from a skills, whether it's like it said, manufacturing skills, specialized skills that our Asian colleagues have, because they've been doing this for a long time. Whether it is affordability, yes, we have got a market, it's a huge market, but our buying power for certain items at this stage is limited. And therefore, while we grow our economy, while we grow our middle class, there is a lot that we can produce and supply to the world while our people start to increase their earnings. So we need the world, whether it is project preparation and identification. We see it more often that sometimes we are relying on wealth that we have not yet realized that it's wealth until somebody who needs that wealth comes and tells us this is wealth. So there is a lot that we need that we can offer the world, but of course we need the world for us to be able to realize that. So then the solution is about partnerships. Partnering first with each other, which probably will come with your second question that you says, how do we work together? Because if we do not partner with each other and we negotiate one of us with the world, I don't think we'll be able to realize what we need. They said there is strength in numbers, and therefore as Africa, we need those numbers together so that we are stronger together. Somebody here yesterday said sometimes we approach issues or challenges that are facing us as the world as if something is a zero-sum game. It is not a zero-sum game. So if Africa approaches this by saying, we don't need other people, it is us, and we do not partner with others, I don't think we will reach the result we need. So after partnering with each other, we need to partner with those that have got skills, we need to partner with those ones that have got markets, and we need to say, yes, the world needs us, we need the world, partnerships will work for all of us, and of course, we move to the next question of how do we coordinate among ourselves to make sure that we bring those solutions to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Nangula. Ndidi?
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person with you in Egypt. Send my best wishes. It's an honor and privilege to be on this panel. I hope you can all hear me. I want to agree with most of what the other panelists, distinguished panelists, and many friends have said. I just wanted to underscore a few points and then add a few more. I sit in Washington, D.C. as the presidency of the One Campaign, which is a global advocacy organization that fights for the investments to ensure healthier lives and economic opportunity in Africa. And our vision is that Africa is an equal player. So every single day I wake up in this role, and as I travel around the world, I am actually thinking about the question you posed. And I think the big conclusion I've come to is that, number one, Africa has to determine together with one voice that we will shape our own agenda. We have tried this many times, and Mamadou talked about the Vision 2063. And we have mechanisms through the AU and our regional economic groups to do it. but we're not doing it well, and we're not doing it convincingly. And so this year, 2025, is a wake-up call, not just because of the geopolitical shifts, but also because we have a new opportunity as Africa hosts the G20 for the first time in South Africa, as we have new leaders at AfriExim, African Development Bank, and African Union. It's an opportunity to reimagine what it means to speak with one voice about critical issues facing our continent, not only in terms of our development, but how we negotiate with the rest of the world when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to our talents, when it comes to how AI is being delivered on our continent, when it comes to the investments from other world regions. And we're not speaking with one voice, and that's a reality. We must speak with one voice. We must demonstrate unity and political will on critical issues that concern us, and recognize the size and commitment that we have, not only in terms of the market opportunities we offer, but also in terms of how we deliver impact. To do this, we also need to invest in good data from the continent and own this data. And that's why I'm so proud of the Cairo Forum and the team behind this work, because you're starting to push on this, but we need more of it. Our data and what happens in Africa is still controlled by the rest of the world. Our narrative is also still controlled by the rest of the world. I'll give a very practical example. When you see data from the World Bank, from the IMF, and many other development organizations, we see that it separates sub-Saharan Africa from North Africa and the MENA region. This needs to change. We need to have data for Africa as a continent. We need the MENA region to come alongside us and North Africa to also fight for this battle, because data is so powerful, and data for the continent needs to be presented as one continent, but that data needs to be real time. The same with narratives. We at One have taken on the issue of the cost of capital this year, because we recognize that African countries pay too much for debt, 5 times other world regions. And this cost of capital agenda has to extend beyond this G20 to other events coming up, G7 in France, the G20 in the US, and so forth, because we need to reduce the bias that is associated with Africa, the African continent, and we need to ensure fairer financing on global platforms and global trade to drive growth on our continent. This means that we also have to change narratives and speak with one voice about the complexity on our continent, but also the opportunities that exist, and tell positive stories. For me, this is foundational. Number 3, we have to own our own financing for development. And at the One campaign, we've taken on the health agenda, because with the cuts globally, our healthcare systems have been exposed, not only the inefficiency and ineffectiveness, but also the fact that many of our countries are still dependent on other world regions to fund our health. And we've laid out a very bold vision that by 2035, at least 50% of our continent should be financing its own healthcare. So we're not dependent on other world regions. And this is where we need not only to leverage innovation and technology to improve health financing on our continent, but also to invest in the health economy of our people and change the narrative about health development from a risk or a development agenda to an economic driver. We also have to think about a lot of issues that have been discussed in this conference around health for debt swaps, the role of the diaspora funding different interventions, and that was discussed in an earlier panel, the role of Africans shaping global health infrastructure, and the need to reform the way that we work as a continent. The final point I'll mention is that we really have to take our youth bulge as a positive agenda. I was just in Riyadh for the Fortune conference, and I noticed the number of Africans coming to work in the Middle East, and I wondered, have we really tapped into the opportunity of sending skilled workforce, but also demanding that countries that take our skilled workforce also treat them fairly and compensate us for training them? Africa's youth population can serve as the workforce for the world, not only in health, but in tourism, in the care economy, and we have a lot to do to prepare, but also to negotiate fairly for our citizens. And this is where Mamadou's point on capacity is so critical, but capacity beyond investing in the young people for the world, but also ensuring that there are policies and interventions to protect them and to generate returns for their engagement on a global stage. I am convinced that this is an opportunity for us as a people and those of us sitting in this room to really put our minds together to commit to building a future where every child born on the African continent not only has access to healthcare, education, jobs, but also gets to live a full and meaningful life and achieve their highest potential. And we must act swiftly now to do that in our lifetime.
Thank you very much, Ndidi. Now, Nathalie.
Well, it's even more difficult to talk after all of you, and thank you for having me, and thank you for having me as an African, which I am by heart and by conviction. So I think this is a great title, indeed, The Africa We Want, which is the title of Agenda 2063, and as you said, it leaves us almost one generation to achieve that, which is much more that we can say for the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are far behind and totally off track when it comes to Africa specifically. I think that as we have discussed very often over the previous session, we are indeed at a tipping point, and as you say, this is an opportunity, because there is no needed change without a deep crisis that has triggered it, so let's make the best of this opportunity. As one speaker said this morning, this is the direction of travel, and there is no coming back to the former world. Now, it may be the end of that world, but it's not the end of the world, and I think this is something that we really need to take into account. It is a welcome wake-up call that needs to push us to change our narrative, paradigm, and processes. Let me just first about the change of narrative and paradigm. When UN and Bretton Woods were created 80 years ago, it was about the North helping the South, or developed countries helping poor, undeveloped, insecure countries who sort of had all the illnesses and crises of the world, pandemics, poverty, inequality, conflict, natural disasters. Today the war is in Europe. Natural disaster, climate impact, pandemics ignore borders and revenues. We are talking now of a world where there are shared challenges that indeed call for shared solutions. And when it comes to traditional partners, solidarity has fallen far beyond security. If you look at numbers, the part of Africa in ODA over the last decade, 2014-2023, has lost 11 percentage points. At the same time, global military expenditure has raised by almost 40%. So we do see the shift of priority. And we see the need to shift that narrative about aid, which is, I know what's best for you. I'm defining the supply, be it education, health, security, even democracy. And two, my aid comes with conditionalities, democracy, rights, or markets. So I think that we are there at this change of paradigm or narrative, and this is, I would say, based on 3 points, maybe. The first one is the importance of geography and demography. History somehow is made by geography and demography. And when we look at Africa, Africa is at the center of geography and demography. By the end of the century, Africa's youth only will represent 44% of the world's youth, and it will be equivalent to twice Europe's population. When you look at the geography, you can see that Africa is at crossroads between several worlds. The second point is partnership, but partnership is based on mutual interest. So we need to define and defend and strengthen this mutual interest and to be aware of our own interest. I think this is really very important. I'll take just one example, which is the incoming conversation around climate in a very few weeks' time. What are the narratives to be changed? Climate policy can't be defined by already developed countries. In Africa, 600 million people still don't have access to energy. We all know that without access to energy, there is no health, no education, no development, no job prospects, no security. So the main point for Africa, for the Africa we want, is that everybody in Africa has access to energy, which means that energy transition doesn't mean much for Africa, and mitigation much less than adaptation. The second point when we talk about adaptation is not just about vulnerability. Adaptation and policy and finance around adaptation in Africa means making sure that Africa has the ability to demonstrate its ability to leapfrog and to be, I would say, at the forefront of building a green industrialization model that would be much less carbon intensive than the former already developed countries have put outside. So it also means being sure and understanding that Africa can be a key stakeholder when it comes to building solutions in building a green global economy. Africa has biodiversity, critical minerals, carbon sinking potential, renewable energy sources. All this must be put on the table, not just having Africa as a beneficiary or end receiver. So yes, I think that yes, we can build and implement the Africa we want. Of course, we need to overcome or join forces, as you said, to overcome many hurdles. We have already touched upon this, but I think it's for the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. I think that concludes our answers on the first question. And I hope what every panelist gave the audience had opened the appetite to ask a question after we finish the second round. But before we go to the second question, I would like to share some of my African experience with the panelists and with the audience as well. I thank Abla for choosing me to moderate this session because she knows about my passion to Africa, and many don't know that, maybe because of my fair skin. But I have served in our embassy in Washington, in Sudan, Khartoum, for 4 years. During those 4 years, there was an effort to transform Sudan to be the breadbasket for Arab countries. And Arab countries established something called Arab Authority for Agriculture Development. And the capital of that authority at that time, I'm talking about 78, was 500 million Kuwaiti dinar, perhaps a few billion dollars now. And all this money went to waste. We don't see any result of that huge amount of sum that was put in place to do something good for the continent and for the Arab countries. My second experience with Africa was Africa Cotton and Textile Federation. That federation was created only with the membership of Sub-Saharan Africa. As a man involved in textile, I was very offended. And I told them, no, you cannot do that without Egypt, Tunis, and Morocco, because most of the exports coming out of Africa in textile come from those 3 countries. How could you start a federation for textile without us? So we imposed ourselves on the federation. I became the vice chairman of that federation for a couple of years. Then COVID hit, and we lost our finance, and the association or the federation now does not exist. But this is a model of how Africans can get together and create something for a particular industry. There is efforts about in this direction for the automotive industry in Africa. And Egypt is playing a role in that, between Egypt, South Africa, and Morocco, and a few others, and Tunisia as well, are involved in this. So that's something, also another model that we need to emulate. My third experience was creating, 11 years ago, I started a B2B trade show called Destination Africa. And over 11 years, this show had become the most important textile show on the continent, where all the textile manufacturers on the continent come to Cairo, show their goods, and we invite buyers from all over the world. Last year, we have 350 buyers from all over the world. This year, probably same number, which is going to happen later this month between 12th and 13th of November. So these are some of the things that we can do on the continent of Africa. However, I would like also to share some of the bad experiences. We cannot fly from Cairo to other capital on the continent unless we go either to Europe or to the Gulf. Maybe Ethiopia now. But I think that's the connectivity between the African countries are missing. Banking systems. We need a lot to work on the banking systems. Land transportation. We have many African countries are landlocked. And those landlocked countries need ports to be able to import and export. So the land transportation also is very, very important. Nothing is happening there. So that will bring me to my second question for the panelists, is how can we benefit in Africa from the new dynamics? How can we integrate our countries to cooperate and achieve African goals for inclusive development and the prosperity for all? We'll start with.
Okay, thank you very much. So I like to frame a context in conversations like this, and I thank my sister Ndidi for framing around the importance of having a single voice and the panel here. So let me frame this differently and pose a question to everyone. Let's say you had a teenager who's just out of school, is not doing well, and you wanted them to have an uplift in life. What would the first thing you'd do be? Tell them. I'm sure for most parents here, you'd tell them, get a job. And you want them to have a good job. Now, if we went to the basics, the wealth you have is a direct function of the job you do, very simply. So if you have a country filled with peasants and farmers, and you have a country filled with electrical and electronic engineers, it's not very hard to determine which of those would outperform each other. If I produce tomatoes and you produce BMWs and fighter jets, and you asked us to sit at the table and trade, there's no amount of tomatoes which would give you an equal buying power as somebody who makes a BMW or a fighter jet. So I guess the question we ask ourselves about the Africa we want and shared prosperity, I think has to start very simply with the quality of work we produce, Africa gives to the world, and the quality of jobs we have for ourselves. From the perspective of a market, I mean, we have an amazing market, we have an amazing opportunity, but we will never successfully capitalize on that market if we cannot effectively create high quality, meaningful jobs which serve the market. Our purchasing power is low. Our ability to drive and grow our economies is limited, largely because the work we do is low value. So If you want to increase your capacity, you get an education and improve your skill, or you get a better job. And this is the advice we'd all give our kids if they were sitting in front of us, and I don't think Africa is any different. So framing it, I think Africa struggles from the perspective of it's producing very low value work, and for it to strengthen its negotiating power, increase its ability, just like China has done, it first needs to really think about how it elevates the quality of work it does. This is foundational. Now, we all remember a decade ago the African lions, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, lions on the move, great McKinsey report. We had a promise, there was a lot of energy, this faltered. Our economies started growing. What were the major risks? Commodity driven. Our growth was not driven by the capacity of the people, it was driven by the resources in the ground. And so we leaned very heavily into our commodities. When these faltered, our economies stumbled. Our GDP was a false start. It was an opportunity for us to do something different, but what we eventually did was just basically chase vanity metrics. And I will say it, GDP is a vanity metric. It doesn't really reflect the true productive capacity of a continent. And as a start, I would say in building the Africa we want, we can talk about the nice things to have, in a sense, better infrastructure, better integration, singular voices. But it's our capacity. It's a capacity to move beyond low-value commodities to high-value work, and our ability to galvanize the very best of us. Look, we will never all be equal. The way Nigerians sing and dance will never be the same way in which Egyptians sing and dance. But there's virtue and value in our diversity, and the power of us harnessing the very best of each of us to become a better continent. So I would say in building our continent, we need to back the very best of us. We need to back the builders, we need to back the thinkers, and we need to back the individuals who are building that pipeline of talent. So every economy that grows is on the back of your champions. You find your champions, you support them, you get your capital markets, you galvanize. There's $1 trillion, $1 trillion sitting today in mobile wallets. $1 trillion, think about that. You know, in Africa's massive population, it's mobile, it has high agency, it has high energy, it has high talent, but very little skill. And I think in terms of thinking of a process, in building the Africa we want, we need to be able to galvanize behind regional champions who scale up and drag everybody else along, in thinking through how as a continent we become more productive on a global scale, whilst we also explore how we solve the very real interoperability challenges in Africa. So our digital interoperability, do we have the right digital infrastructure? Do we have the right financial market infrastructure? Financial markets are a very real thing. There's so much friction in moving money and moving it around the continent that if you don't have financial market infrastructure, the economy falls flat. Liquidity, there is no economy grows by holding your breath. You know, if you can't mobilize liquidity to galvanize, liquidity is the lifeblood of every economy. If you can't mobilize liquidity to galvanize your economy, there is no growth. Energy, and on and on and on. But I think the core of it is, where do you start from? I think the start is galvanizing our human potential until we can make a clean transition from pure commodity-driven markets to human capital-driven markets in every sector. We will continue to struggle with false starts, the promise of market opportunity, but very quickly lagging behind on the capacity, or the human capacity to deliver on it. And I think that's the hard conversation to have, because you can't turn on capacity. It's not a light switch. You know, we all have the will to win, but the will to prepare to win is a lot harder to find. And that's really what we need to begin from. We need to prepare. We need to build that capacity for a generation and set them up for success. And I think in building the Africa we want, I thought it was useful to frame that conversation before we get to the conversations around infrastructure and integration. On a very pragmatic level, I think the elephant in the room is how are we thinking about our capacity, how are we developing it, and how are we galvanizing towards accelerating that capacity, possibly based on the regional strengths rather than trying to create duplication and a uniform playing field across the continent.
Good point, Ehizogie. We have to have our priorities straight. Ayo?
Yes, thank you. So on the topic of integration, because I think that was your question, how do we integrate, right? I think the easiest low-hanging fruit on integration is capital. So if Egyptians were deliberate about investing in South African companies, not as a sentimental, we want to invest in Africa thing, but because there's a strong business case for the investment, then we're integrated, because where your money is, you tend to care about where your money is, right? There's also, I think before we start thinking about mobilizing capital, there is a mental shift that needs to happen, and integration that probably starts in the mind. Thinking about Africa as a collective, and it doesn't mean homogeneity, it doesn't mean we're the same, it doesn't mean we sing and dance the same way. No, it means that we think of each other as a big potential unit that on aggregate presents a strong business case. I'll use my personal journey as a quick example. Born and raised in Nigeria, started my business in the commodities industry in Nigeria, and quickly realized the only reason that I worked in Nigeria was because I was born there, right? I mean, there was no, Nigeria is a big oil economy, but as far as the industry that I focused on, that I had worked in for about 15 years, which was the metals and commodities space, Nigeria wasn't very strong. So I quickly basically shifted mentally and said, look, I need to work across the continent. And the first market that we worked in outside of Nigeria was Mauritania. Then we looked at Morocco and ended up settling in Zambia. That integration is possible when you start to think of Africa as a single opportunity. And I hate to use the idea of a single market, but because it's nothing close to that. But I think starting from the mind and then acting financially, towards the continent, towards the 1.4 billion people, the population. I think it starts mentally. And then final point is, there's a lot of resources in African hands outside of the African continent. So the African American community, for example, is a huge opportunity that we've ignored, on both sides since forever. Right? I think that level of integration as well needs to be considered. Ghana is a good case study. In 2018, 2019, they had the year of the return. And a lot of dollars and people flowed into Ghana from the African diaspora. So that level of integration is also quite necessary if we're going to build the Africa that we want. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ayo. I think your idea of the African diaspora, I think very valid one, and I think we should pursue it. Mamadou?
Thank you. The question of how integration, can we drive that more, that supports the delivery of the Africa we want, I think relates a little bit about my previous panel. when I spoke about really how we can address the hindrances about integration and collaboration among Africans to achieve what Ndidi is calling that one voice, one resolve. Oftentimes when we pitch about Africa's potential, we talk about a continent of 1.4 billion people, continent and all of that. Yes, it is, but it's not one market. It is a continent already divided in 55 countries, 55 regulations, 55 everything. So it is the most fragmented, actually, market. Luckily, of course, we have now the AFCFTA, which by now is being ratified. I think it's already ratified by many people. But I think that this will work only if we also work on regional blocks that have been here before as well. Ndidi, you and I come from a regional bloc called ECOWAS, that is often cited as the most integrated regional bloc. Yet, until today, the idea of that integration is not, since 1975, right, until now, is still not a reality, right? Mobility, even within ECOWAS, even if it is probably better than many other regional blocs, right? You can still see the problem with the movement of goods, with the movement of capital, etc. The movement of entrepreneurs and investors. I believe that our investment strategies and codes at the national level probably favors more investors from outside of Africa than investors from other fellow African countries. So this is why I talked about really harmonizing institutional frameworks to work together. The other thing I want to talk about is we talk about also the Africa we want. This means also that fragmentation is really important because it's really about also countries implementing what they agree and decide at the African Union. Today, if you look at the study, shows that it's less than 30% of African Union decisions that are actually implemented by member states. So that if we have to really play on that integration, actually we need to actually work on that better. Finally, I think that it's all about really leadership and coming together and having a strong representation and that strong voice. And having an agenda strong that actually looks at also how do we work with others, right? So I think those are really important elements that we need to bring together. It's really going from a market with 54 or 55 regulatory frameworks and individual projects to really opening up that to the content. I believe that actually the young generation, what we call the Gen Zs and the others, actually with their new mindset and abilities and the way they see the world, I see really an opportunity for them to actually helping bring the continent together more than us, the older generation, which really hang on to the national flags and etc., more than we look at the continent as a whole and continue to perpetuate Africa as we inherited it from 1886, rather than, you know, making it work and harness the potential it has today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadou. I think you referred to ACFTA that came at the back of other regional FTAs like the SADC and anyway, there was East and West and South groups, but perhaps if we gave them the opportunity to mature and be fully functional, the ACFTA would have had easier approach. But I think we need to work on ACFTA to make the movement of goods and then the movement of capital and then the movement of people more possible.
If I may add very quickly, one of the biggest challenges with those sort of conventions, whether it is at the regional or Pan-African continental level, is actually we don't always go all the way. What happens is actually these conventions are signed, they are ratified by the parliaments, they are even promulgated by the heads of states into laws. But then that's oftentimes where we stop. We don't go and reform and revise, domesticate those by revising national laws, national policies, actually to integrate that. That's number one. Number two, we don't go and really developing the playbooks of people, for people who are meant to implement this on a day-to-day basis. You know, the way the customs officer behaved before whatever that convention is, was signed, is the same as of today. Yeah. Because this is not being implemented in a very practical way. We think that when we have signed, it's done. No, we need a little bit more, and this comes really again to what I was saying, which is the capacity to actually implement. Thank you.
It needs a lot of hard work, my friend. Nangula?
Thank you. So I think there's a lot that has been said, and especially I think one thing we are all agreeing is that there's quite a structural barriers in Africa that we need to address if we need to get where we are going. Yes, we are talking about, there's a lot we have agreed on. We have got the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, we have got air connectivity agreement. We need to be more practical now as to, yes, and even regionally, there's a lot that is working well in the South, there's a lot that is working well in the East, there is good project between Uganda and Kenya. There is good things happening in the West and in the North. So we seem to have these pockets of excellence. So the point is then, how do we speed up and how do we scale up? So of course we are the patient continent, but probably we need to now start going far together. We don't need to kind of go far together slowly. We need to go faster. But I think one thing, and this is now almost my passion. So like you said, I'm a chartered accountant. I was a public auditor and a consultant for about 24 years. And then I left and joined the public service. So I'm now working for government in investment promotion and economic development. And why I left and something I studied on was I found out I'm consulting with the government and the private sector, and I see their heart for Namibia, but I'm missing how they link together to bring about the changes in Namibia. So I think that one of the challenges we have in Africa is about bringing the private sector as a partner in solving the challenges that are facing us. Our third First Lady of Namibia usually has this statement that says, the most pressing challenges and needs of Africa are normally, and even in Namibia, are at the hands or at the door of public sector. But most of our brilliant minds are in the private sector. How can we get Africa to stop underutilizing the private sector? Or how do we determine, what is our policy stance in Africa with regard to private sector or with regard to economic development? If you look at, for example, China, I have not studied well, so please forgive me if I don't understand a few things. But I think China's attitude towards development, it is driven by the state and the state is investing, and the state is planning. They invest in research and development. They put together state-owned enterprises that are specialized and focused. I think if you look at countries such as the UAE, they are doing something similar. You go to the West, development is driven by the private sector, mostly, but the state makes sure that they have got enabling laws and policies. So who is driving development in Africa? Is it in the hand of the public sector? Is it in the hand of the private sector? I think that is probably not very clear. And therefore, we are not deliberate about building a strong African private sector that is tasked with the responsibility of solving African development problems, but the state is not doing it either, because we are faced with pressing needs of lack of energy, no food, so we are solving the everyday problems. Who is thinking about the future and who is tasked with that development? How can the government of Africa bring in the private sector more into the conversation so that we have got a public-private dialogue at country level, at Africa level, and say that while some of us are solving these, what we call bread and butter matters, some of us should be thinking about the development and the future of Africa. And therefore, yes, with private sector, I think the cross-border transactions becomes easier, because while when you are, as a government, you are elected and limited to your country, private sector can easily move from one country to another to bring about solution. So I really believe that being more deliberate about the role of the private sector in Africa, strengthening them as partners in development of Africa, can probably help us to bring about the practical solutions that we need to most of the conversations that we are having at AU and other levels. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Perhaps this is what they call it, public-private partnership. But you need it in a wider space, not just a limited thing. Thank you, Nangula. Ndidi?
Thank you so much. Great comments by everyone. I want to just focus on what we can do going forward, given what has been said and the need for us to go beyond talk shops, to come back next year and actually look at our progress. So I'd lay out a few ideas. The first is for greater integration. We clearly need to speak with one voice. And I like Mamadou's idea for strengthening our regional economic communities, strengthening the AFCTA, actually laying out very, very clear visions with clear milestones for what the progress should be on integration. I am extremely frustrated at the pace of the AFCTA. I don't think it's delivering for Africans. And if we just use food as an opportunity and food trade as an opportunity, which is a low-hanging fruit, I think there are very, very clear milestones for synergies around not only trademarks across the continent, but if one regulatory agency certifies that the food is good in Cairo and Egypt, you can sell it in Nigeria or Senegal or whatever other country. Also marketplaces for integration. I started African Food Change Makers many years ago, which has entrepreneurs now from 49 African countries on the platform starting to engage, starting to trade. This is an example of what AFCTA should be doing in spades by sector. And there are a few sectors that are ready for integration and ready for trade. We can see that not only in telco and financial services, but also in construction and food manufacturing, etc. So we definitely need our regional economic communities, our continental-wide agreements to work for us. I was in Egypt 2 years ago, last year, for the AfriExim's Canex. And I brought chefs and different food companies together. And it was interesting that the chefs who were doing the jollof wars from 4 African countries had to bring in plantain. And the organizers brought the plantain from South America. And I was distraught. I said, do you understand that Nigeria has, and many West African countries have plantain grown in our countries. Why did you go to South America to find the plantain for this competition? And they said they didn't know. And so that information asymmetry has to be closed. I think there are many opportunities for us to build stronger industry and sector-wide platforms like African Food Changemakers, and I would really encourage us to think through how we can unlock those opportunities and scale them. The second is the importance of speaking with one voice on a global platform. And we've talked about the African Union, and Mamadou's data on only 30% of what they decide is implemented is key. But I see across global platforms, the G20, the G7, the BRICS, wherever we're represented, we often also do not speak with one voice about what we need. And I've this year been in the Africa Nordic Forum, I've been in so many forums around the world, and it just breaks my heart that we continue to have more compacts and contracts and bilateral arrangements that actually are not conducive and not transparent and not well known to our citizens. So I think it's really important we leverage these, and we also have a clear idea of what we want as a continent, and then countries come in to partner with us. I recently noted in one country, Malawi, 50 compacts and contracts with other world regions. In another country, Kenya, just in agriculture, another 55 compacts and contracts. So our ministries end up being contract management agencies. This must stop. And I think I'm calling this out, and I'm asking for us and the Cairo Forum and the leaders in the room to understand what will it take for us to have an agenda where countries come in to fit into our agenda and not the other way around, at the continental level, at the regional level, and at the country level. This is urgent and important, especially at a time when we are seeing geopolitical shifts emerging. We must have a common agenda on critical minerals, common pricing from Africa for the rest of the world, a common commitment to value addition on the ground in Africa, a common agenda on what sustainable jobs mean and how they should be reflected on the ground. And this is, for me, front and center. And third, our friends at Africa No Filter have already come out with a very bold agenda on redrawing the African map to show what Africa, the size of the continent. I've come out with another one on how we report data coming out of the continent, who owns that data, but also how that data is calculated as Africa. And I think this is another agenda that we need to put on the table. And finally, last but not the least, is this issue of narratives. The conflicts and reporting on conflicts continues to dominate. Just earlier this week, the whole, we've talked about Sudan, we've talked about the Nigeria issues, and oftentimes it dominates the press where it's not nuanced, and we need to override that with positive stories. We need more media coming out of the continent speaking about the successes, the investor successes, the opportunities, and telling those positive narratives. And I'm very committed to this. And one is working on this, and I invite you to join us. We keep saying Africa is not a risk. Africa is a return on investment. And here is data to prove it. Here are stories to prove it. Yes, there are conflicts, but there are good stories too. And let's be nuanced and balanced about how we tell that narrative. And I call on all of you to work alongside us. If we look at ChatGPT and AI today, only 2% of the content is from the African continent. We need to tell more positive stories, provide more data, provide more narratives, and work together. And I'll end with what my sister just talked about. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. We have to go fast and far together. And to do that, we have to leave our egos and logos at the door and work with integrity, accountability, and transparency, with one voice and a commitment to shared political will and building for a future that others will hold us accountable for what we do today to prepare for generations that will come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndidi. I think I would like to recommend to the organizers, after listening to the script of this panel, to come up with some policy recommendations and pass it on to the AU and the ACFTA. I think that would be very helpful. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time. There is a question that we're going to appear here for the polling.
Yes, we're in the voting stage. But you didn't talk, Nathalie, I think?
No.
Nathalie, yes.
I'll try to be as quick as possible.
No, please. You have 2 minutes to go.
Basically, because everything has already been said, but sorry, I'll try to be very quick. I think there are 5 points that we need to address. Many of them have been said. The first one is definitely define a common African position ahead of global debates, because this is still missing. And I remember when we were advocating for an African seat at G20, very often the reaction was, but what African voice? Who is going to define it? Are they even able to have an African voice? And who is going to talk on behalf of Africa? Is it the President of African Union who changes every year, or what? So this is the first point. The second point is, I think indeed, just said, update the narrative. Be conscious of our wealth, of our assets, and talk about that. I mean, when we did the Financing the Africa We Want report last year in Marrakesh, many numbers have been shared and data. I'll give just a couple. Illicit financial flows leaving the continent on average every year are bigger than ODA received. If you put together sovereign funds and pension funds, African sovereign funds and African pension funds, the current assessed stock is more than $300 million. So there are resources, we need to talk about it, but we also need to walk the talk. It's not normal that FDI, African FDI in Africa is only limited to 14% of total FDI in Africa, while everybody knows that the return, the current return on FDI in Africa are almost twice average return. So we really need to do that. 3, I would say, in this African common position, maybe try to slightly move the narrative here again to, this is not as much about more money as about smarter money. So discuss about the processes. Debt, and I'll take 2 examples. Debt, for example, the current debt stock of Africa is a quarter of Africa's GDP. Egypt every year pays $10 billion just to the service of debt. So we need to work on that. We need to work on the SDR allocation mechanism. We need to work about risk coverage, because these are the elephants in the room. 4, continental integration, we've talked about it. What would China be if China was 54 different countries? It wouldn't be China. So it's very important to accelerate this continental integration. And I think economy is at the base. If you look at EU, and here there are probably best practices to share or lessons to learn, EU integration began with the common market on steel and carbon. Why don't we do the same in Africa about critical minerals, for example? Why don't we think about a common currency, which is what is also making the strength of European Union? Last but not least, I would say that there will be no leveraging of African domestic resources, how important they are, be it youth, critical minerals, or whatever, if we don't address the elephant in the room, which is the current state of rule of law, conflict, and safety. So it's really something that we need to continue to work about, because otherwise the so-called African premium will still be very high. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathalie, and thank you all for your contribution. Abla, there is a question will come here.
Yes. The voting question is going to come. It's a very, very, very rich session. There are 2 sentences that I want to repeat here. No one is going to save Africa. We have to save ourselves. The world is in a feast. Everyone has a seat, but Africa is on the menu. This is a very scary statement. I mean, I see us on the menu. And then Nigerian dancers and Egyptian dancers do not dance in the same way, which is also very interesting and should be explored. Okay, let's have the voting question, please. Yes. What is the most important, actually, driver of change to unlock the Africa we want? A, stronger governance and anti-corruption radical reforms. B, large-scale needed infrastructure projects. C, youth-led innovation and entrepreneurship. D, start with human capital, education and health. And E, an Africa with one voice.
Generation Z has no appetite for these questions.
No, they have the appetite. They still have 46 seconds to go. Everybody, please.
Interesting, eh?
Hey. خليني بس. Okay, time is up. Very interesting vote. They're completely different from each other. From the youth, 52% see the future in them. Youth-led innovation and entrepreneurship. Of course, it's expected.
Of course, they know it all.
They know it all, yes. 20, no, B, large-scale needed infrastructure projects, Gen Zs do not see it at all. 27% from the others see it as important. And then we have the start with human capital is receiving a lot of attention here and there. Very interesting results. Thank you very much. It should be all, no, I put in, the idea was for us not to put easy answers. See? Okay, very quickly, okay, you're going to have lunch now. There are 2 closed sessions for lunch, one on AI and one on energy and security. This was the last plenary session. We look forward to seeing you in Cairo Forum 3 next year, 2026, inshallah, also in November and also in early November. And I want from all of you, this is the 3rd request, a very big hand to the ECES team, okay, which has done all this work. Very big hand, okay? Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch, and go to the invitation, everything. Yeah, bye. Picture, please, picture before we leave.